The story begins with a young girl named Aerin, recalling the tragic events of her past life. She had been an orphan, betrayed by the very workplace she had poured her heart and soul into. Ultimately, she was murdered. In her final moments, she wished to be reborn as a nobleman's child, only to face death once more. Now, still a toddler, Aerin lay gravely ill, burning with fever as her maids desperately tried to keep her conscious. They summoned a physician, but the man, clearly exasperated by her condition, curtly remarked that if she were to die, she should do so with some decorum. Already drowning in pain, Aerin realized with dawning horror that she had been reborn into the family of the very man who had killed her in her past life. Fear gripped her as she struggled to process this cruel twist of fate. Time passed, and Aerin eventually recovered. Feeling invigorated, she ran about excitedly, much to the chagrin of her nanny, Marie, who worried that Aerin might relapse. Marie scolded her and insisted she rest, terrified of losing her position within the Brauno household should anything untoward happen to the child. Aerin reluctantly agreed, still struggling to accept her new life as a member of the Brauno family, the very family responsible for her demise in her previous life. Aerin recalled her past life as Brauno's secretary, toiling diligently for 10 years, only to be betrayed and murdered by Havenik Brauno. She was shocked to realize that in her rebirth, she had returned to a time before he had formally inherited the ducal title. The Brauno estate, once her workplace, was now her home. The late Duke Havenik Brauno had struggled to choose an heir among his 3 sons, as none possessed a talent for business. Ultimately, Havenik had been the only viable option and inherited the title. Once secure in his position, he had secretly engaged in corruption and criminal activities, and had entrusted Aerin with handling the illicit money laundering operations. Despite being forced into these shady dealings, she had obeyed every command, believing her loyalty and hard work would eventually earn her recognition and security. However, her efforts were in vain, as Havenik reaped all the benefits while treating her as a disposable pawn. Over the years, Aerin had witnessed countless individuals fall victim to his cruel schemes, but she never imagined she would meet the same fate. Raised under the Brauno family's patronage, she had naively believed they would appreciate her worth, but in the end, she was merely a commoner, disposable refuse. Aerin recalled the grim end of her past life, abandoned at a secluded seaside resort to die. While the location was serene, it also ensured that no one would hear her cries for help. She yearned to live, begging for mercy, but no one offered her any compassion. Ultimately, she died alone and desolate, with no friends, no lover, no family, and no place to call home. As her body grew cold, she accepted her fate, acknowledging that she had chosen to be an accomplice to a corrupt man and had only herself to blame. Lost in these painful memories, Aerin was abruptly pulled back to reality by her nanny, Marie, who expressed her joy at seeing her recovery. Marie confessed that she had prayed for Aerin's health all night, though she wasn't sure if it had helped. Aerin was deeply touched by these kind words, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. After a lifetime of loneliness and betrayal, hearing such genuine concern nearly brought tears to her eyes. Marie gently told Aerin that she would bring her a special treat, just like old times, with biscuits, raspberries, and milk. However, Aerin felt a pang of unease at these words. The combination sounded far too familiar. She realized it was the menu for the after-dinner snack given to the household servants. Appalled, Aerin quickly refused, feigning a lack of appetite. She couldn't accept food meant for the workers, knowing it would deprive them of their rations. Marie seemed surprised, but didn't press the matter further. She simply told Aerin to let her know if she changed her mind, as she had plenty stored away. As Aerin reflected on this, a crucial realization dawned on her. Aerin Brauno, the girl whose life she now inhabited, had never been treated well by her own family. The rumors she'd heard in her past life were true. As the only daughter of Coloni Brauno, one of the late Duke's 3 sons, due to Coloni's strained relationship with the rest of the family, Aerin, after her parents' death, had been taken in by the Duke's household, but never properly cared for. Her nanny, Marie, was perhaps one of the few people who genuinely showed her any kindness. But Aerin couldn't shake the unsettling knowledge that this girl hadn't been treated like a nobleman's granddaughter at all. The thought gnawed at her. Then she remembered the man who had so coldly dismissed her during her illness. The mere thought of him sent a shiver down her spine. her anxiety making her pale. Aerin recalled that, in her previous life, Aerin Brauno had been adopted by Havenik Brauno the same year she had entered the estate service. However, by the time she arrived at the mansion, Aerin Brauno was already dead, supposedly from an accident, a fall. But none of Havenik's servants truly believed that story. Havenik, a man who wouldn't even care if his fever-stricken nephew were dying, must have only adopted Aerin to curry favor with the head of the family. When she proved to be of no use to him, she likely became a burden he disposed of. Aerin clenched her fists, the danger of her situation becoming starkly clear. If things progressed as they had before, she would be adopted by Havenik again, leaving her trapped with no escape, just like in her past life. She would be killed without a chance to fight back. But this time, she refused to let history repeat itself. She believed there had to be a reason she was reborn as Aerin Brauno. Struggling to write because her hands were so small, she wondered if this reincarnation was a message from the gods, urging her to atone for the sins of her past life. So this life wouldn't be easy. She knew what she had to do. Just like before, she would fight with everything she had to survive. And the first step to ensuring her survival was clear. With steely determination, Aerin vowed that she absolutely could not be adopted by Havenik. Aerin wandered through the vast library of the Brauno family estate, searching for specific books. The library was housed in a separate building beside the mansion. Grand in scale, a testament to the power and wealth of the ducal family, it was filled with a treasure trove of information, holding the key to her next move. After browsing the shelves, she finally found what she was looking for: fundamental magical science, foundations of advanced magical science, and similar titles. These would help her execute the plan she had painstakingly formulated the previous night. Magical science was a field that scientifically studied magical power, primarily focused on the creation of magical tools. Tools powered by magic stones. Thanks to magical scientists, the Adina Empire had developed a rich civilization, boasting numerous magical inventions that aided everyday life. However, there was one major drawback. Magical tools required a significant amount of magic stones, and the supply for mining them had been steadily decreasing. In her past life, there was even a saying, if you didn't have money, you shouldn't even consider studying magical science. Determined, Aerin immersed herself in the books, preparing for what lay ahead. Lugging the heavy books, Aerin reminded herself that money wasn't an issue for the wealthy Brauno family, especially considering the person who would adopt her was solely interested in magical science. As she walked through the library, she noticed a particularly messy table, piled high with books and scattered papers. Curious, she glanced at the titles, recognizing them as advanced magical science research materials, such as Imperial Magical Science and the Unified Formula. Just as she began to piece things together, a sudden voice startled her move. Aerin froze, her face paling as she recognized the speaker. Geoffrey Brauno, the third son of Duke Raphael, was a researcher of ill repute, known as the Mad Magical Scientist. He shunned interaction at the main estate, locking himself away in his laboratory, utterly absorbed in his research. However, Aerin knew that if someone possessed knowledge of magical science, they might be able to capture his attention. While Geoffrey was undoubtedly eccentric and unpredictable, he wasn't like Havenik. At least she hoped he might just be eccentric but not a murderite. Aerin summoned her courage and approached Geoffrey, but he immediately barked at her to put down whatever she was holding. Flustered, she apologized, but he sharply told her not to sneak around and to leave quickly, leaving her feeling pale and disheartened. Aerin sat down, realizing she'd made a grave mistake. Geoffrey was obsessively protective of his work, and she'd not only gotten too close, but had also accidentally touched his research journal. Her plan had been to pique Geoffrey's interest so he might consider adopting her. Though she lacked a deep understanding of magical science, her experience with future magical technology made her think she could intrigue him. Instead of being impressed, she was lucky he hadn't thrown her out. Peeking at Geoffrey from behind a book, she recalled what she had seen in his journal. While it currently only contained basic numbers and symbols, she was certain it was the Elflow magical calculation formula. Aerin recognized L-Flow as a groundbreaking magical calculation formula in magical science. It allowed the creation of magical tools using only a minimal amount of magic stones. Though complex and difficult to commercialize, it eventually became an essential component in all magical tools. However, Aerin remembered that L-Flow was originally developed in Havenik's laboratory. After becoming the heir, Havenik recklessly managed his family's business. Yet, the Brauno family had survived entirely because of L-Flow. In her past life, Havenik had been immensely proud of how the family benefited from his discovery, constantly boasting about his foresight. But now, seeing the formula in Jeffrey's hands, Aerin anxiously wondered, had Havenik stolen Jeffrey's research? She wanted to warn Jeffrey that L-Flow would become a major invention in a few years, and he mustn't let Havenik take the credit. However, she worried that Jeffrey, consumed by his research, might not care about such things at all. If he had cared, he would have raised hell in her past life. But he never had. Preoccupied with his work, Jeffrey crumpled up a piece of paper in frustration as he wrestled with a formula. Aerin noticed the discarded paper, quickly glancing at it and realizing something crucial. Nervously, she approached Jeffrey to point it out, but before she could speak, Jeffrey abruptly snatched the paper from her hand. To her shock, Jeffrey, without a word, immediately began scribbling calculations on the paper again, ignoring Aerin's presence. Frustrated by his silence, Aerin persisted in trying to get his attention. Finally, she blurted out that he had miscalculated. Jeffrey angrily refuted Aerin's claim about his miscalculation. He yelled at her in frustration. Aerin, feeling pale and on edge, couldn't understand why he was so angry when she was only trying to help. But her frustration boiled over, and she emotionally yelled back, insisting that there were 3 errors in his calculations, then ran out of the room. Jeffrey, caught off guard, yelled after her, but she was already gone. Later, Aerin sat in her room, berating herself for her impulsive outburst. She worried she had ruined her chances of being adopted and even considered running away. But realizing there was nothing she could do now, she decided to return to the library to borrow the book she hadn't gotten the day before. She also planned to apologize to Jeffrey if she saw him. However, when she opened the door, she gasped, eyes widening in terror as Jeffrey stood before her, his voice booming her name. Aerin flinched, squeezing her eyes shut instinctively. But instead of a scolding, he held out the paper from before, demanding to know if the 3 places she'd mentioned were truly errors. Still shaken, Aerin nervously confirmed, yes, they were indeed mistakes. Now convinced she'd been spying on his research, Jeffrey pressed her, asking how long she'd been at it. Aerin, bewildered, insisted she'd only seen it yesterday for the first time, but Jeffrey remained skeptical. He questioned how she could have found 3 complex errors in such a short time, arguing his research wasn't something one could grasp at a glance. Realizing his misunderstanding, Aerin explained that she was simply good with calculations. Jeffrey, testing her further, asked if she understood advanced magical equations. Confidently, Aerin replied that even advanced formulas still followed basic mathematical principles like addition and subtraction. Jeffrey, still dubious but intrigued, listened. Sensing his doubt, Aerin challenged him to test her abilities. After a brief pause, Jeffrey grinned, agreeing that testing her wouldn't be a bad idea. He began the test, handing Aerin a stack of research papers, tasking her with checking for errors. Despite being unfamiliar with magical formulas, even after her rebirth, Aerin meticulously scanned the pages, swiftly pinpointing the mistakes. As Jeffrey continued to test her, Aerin confidently identified errors or confirmed their absence on pages without any. Jeffrey grew increasingly astonished by her accuracy and speed, demanding to know how she could perform such complex calculations in her head. Meanwhile, Aerin inwardly preened, knowing she was making a strong impression. She recalled her past life, where she had been one of the brightest prodigies at the orphanage, earning her the Brauno family sponsorship. Impressed, Jeffrey instructed Aerin to meet him that afternoon. When Aerin asked if it was in the library, he corrected her, stating it would be in his laboratory. Surprised, Aerin questioned why. Jeffrey bluntly stated that she would be his assistant from now on. This left Aerin feeling anxious and conflicted. She had wanted to catch his attention, but this felt like a business arrangement, not a step towards adoption. Before she could leave, Jeffrey abruptly asked her favorite snack. Catching Aerin off guard, she hesitated, knowing expensive treats were a rare luxury, finally settling on cookies. Jeffrey confirmed her choice and left. Resigned, Aerin figured she had no choice but to go. Standing outside Jeffrey's room, she tried to muster her courage. She reassured herself that becoming his assistant wasn't the worst-case scenario, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if she ended up working tirelessly, just like in her past life, only to be adopted by Havenik and meet a tragic end? She quickly dismissed these negative thoughts, realizing Jeffrey was her only option for now, and resolved to win him over. Just as she was about to knock, Jeffrey opened the door, catching her by surprise. Flustered, she stepped inside, hesitantly greeting him. Looking around his room, she was surprised by its tidiness, especially for someone who spent most of their time engrossed in research. Jeffrey directed Aerin to a small desk, explaining that the head butler had prepared it in haste and promising a better one later. Thanking him, Aerin sat down. Jeffrey told her to wait while he finished some work, casually mentioning she could eat what was on the table. Curious, Aerin noticed a covered plate. Assuming it held cookies, she lifted the cover, only to find a strawberry cream cake. Stunned, her mouth watering, she hesitated, unsure if she should really indulge. Catching Jeffrey's approving nod, she dug in with delight. As she ate, Aerin was captivated by the cake's deliciousness, savoring the perfect blend of cream and strawberries. She was beginning to think Jeffrey wasn't quite as volatile or terrifying as she'd initially imagined. Noticing how quickly she was devouring the cake, Jeffrey raised an eyebrow in surprise. Aerin mumbled an embarrassed apology, explaining that it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Jeffrey calmly told her to wipe her mouth before speaking. Confused, Aerin checked her reflection in her fork and discovered her face was smeared with crumbs. Mortified, she flushed crimson, realizing the frosting had also made its way onto her lips. She stammered a thank you to him, quickly turning away to clean herself up. Jeffrey then asked if she wanted more cake, and Aerin hastily declined, claiming she was full. He assured her that if she wanted more, she shouldn't hesitate to ask, as there would always be snacks available as long as she worked there. Aerin then noticed a faint blush creeping up Jeffrey's neck and tinting his ears, suspicion blossoming. She wondered if he had baked the cake himself, and asked him directly. Jeffrey tried to appear nonchalant, scoffing and claiming he was merely particular about what he ate. Aerin, realizing that Jeffrey was not only brilliant at research, but also an incredible baker, found herself viewing him in a more refined and sophisticated light. Jeffrey quickly steered the conversation back to work, telling her to follow him so he could explain her duties. He handed Aerin a book titled Encyclopedia of Magical Science, proudly declaring it his own work and boasting that there was no better text in the entire empire. Aerin thanked him, but Jeffrey clarified that he was lending it, not gifting it. He then mentioned that now that she had replenished her energy, they could begin work. Aerin looked at him, puzzled. So Jeffrey explained that geniuses like themselves required sweets to fuel their brains, as sugar aided cerebral function. Aerin, realizing the cake was merely meant to energize her for work, was momentarily taken aback. He then assigned her a task similar to the morning's, finding errors within a mountain of research materials. Aerin felt a pang of overwhelm, thinking it felt suspiciously like child labor. However, when Jeffrey casually added that he would prepare chocolate and apple pie for tomorrow, Aerin's mood instantly brightened, and she eagerly agreed to work hard. Humming cheerfully, Aerin practically skipped down the hallway. Her plan to attract Jeffrey through magical science was working even better than anticipated, and she felt a thrill of excitement. She was confident that by continuing to show interest in the field and assisting with his research, her favorability would naturally increase. Ultimately, when she reached peak favorability, she planned to abruptly request adoption into the Brauno family, where she could live a life of luxury. As she walked, two boys, Avalon and Bimel, spotted her and called out rudely, sneering at her presence in the main house. Aerin recognized them as Havenik's sons and had expected to encounter them sooner or later. She noted that they were just as uncouth as she remembered, but decided not to react. Observing their expressions, she realized they likely harassed her frequently. However, unlike her previous life, where she had to grovel as a secretary, she now considered herself on equal footing with them. With newfound confidence, she simply smiled instead of feeling inferior. Both Avalon and Bimel were stunned when Aerin merely smiled, offering no negative reaction. Confused, they assumed she must have eaten something strange. Aerin confidently brushed them off, stating she was busy and they could talk later. This irritated Avalon, who poked her forehead, demanding to know why an outsider like her was in the main house. Avalon was taken aback when Aerin didn't cry as she usually did, momentarily speechless. Bimel, also annoyed by her attitude, snapped at her. However, Aerin remained unfazed, boldly retorting that she wasn't an outsider. Then, with a smug grin, she called them the PP brothers to mock them, leaving both Avalon and Bimel shocked and apprehensive. Bimel whispered in astonishment, wondering how Aerin knew their secret. Avalon, flustered, tried to brush it off, but was clearly shaken. Aerin, smirking triumphantly, revealed that their mother used to fret about it when she worked in the house. She told them she'd keep their secret if they just left her alone, scolding them and pointing out that even younger siblings wouldn't act as childishly as they were. This infuriated Avalon, who shrieked a denial that Aerin could ever be their sister. Bimel, equally incensed, accused her of getting cocky just because she had something on them. Aerin walked away, nonchalantly suggesting they were either avoiding her because they were afraid of fecal matter or because they found it dirty. Unable to stand being ignored, Avalon furiously blocked her path, demanding she go through him if she wanted to leave, calling it the outsider's way. Aerin, exasperated by Avalon and Bimel's behavior, refused to back down, demanding they move while she was still being polite. Her confidence stunned them, further frustrating Avalon. She warned them they would be in trouble if the Duke found out about their behavior. Enraged, Avalon grabbed Aerin's hair, yanking it hard, berating her for her perceived arrogance and threatening her. He sneered at her orphan status, claiming their grandfather wouldn't care even if she disappeared. Provoked by his words, Aerin slammed the book in her hand into Avalon's face, causing him to cry out in pain, blood welling up on his forehead. She boldly declared she'd rather be an orphan than be like him, calling him trash. Bimel yelped in alarm at Avalon's injury. Still furious, Aerin brandished the book in the air, further intimidating them. Startled, Avalon and Bimel retreated, Bimel yelling that she was crazy as they fled. Infuriated by the blow, Avalon, blood dripping down his face, tried to retaliate, calling her an outsider and threatening her, but Aerin fought back fiercely, grabbing his face, refusing to yield. The two grappled fiercely. Later, Avalon and Bimel burst into their father's office to complain about Aerin, demanding she be punished. Avalon yelled about getting even, while Bimel insisted that the outsider, Aerin, had dared to hit his older brother. Their father, Havenik, seeing Aerin's disheveled state after the fight, glared at her and demanded an explanation. Avalon attempted to twist the narrative to his advantage, blatantly lying that they had simply asked Aerin why she was in the main house, but she had insulted them about bedwetting and then attacked Avalon with a book. Aerin was stunned, realizing how easily they distorted the truth, painting her as the aggressor and putting her in a precarious position. Havenik brutally chastised her, accusing her of clearly being raised without parents. Avalon, still seething, shoved her roughly and demanded his father punish her, rather than address Avalon's own provocation. Their father, Havenik, scorned him for being beaten by a little girl, but still ordered Aerin to apologize and be done with it. Aerin felt a surge of shock and anger. Avalon had started it, insulting her, pulling her hair, and even hitting her, yet she was the one being asked to kneel and apologize. When she remained silent in disbelief, Havenik's expression darkened. He shoved her hard, demanding an apology in a menacing tone. Aerin tried to protest, insisting Avalon had started it, but Havenik's fury only intensified, ordering her to kneel immediately. Terrified, Aerin recognized the cold, commanding look in Havenik's eyes, a warning to be silent and obey. She realized that resistance might only make things worse, and considered whether it was better to just comply. Suddenly, Jeffrey arrived, his appearance startling Aerin. His voice cut through the tense atmosphere, demanding, "What treason has she committed? That requires her to kneel." Aerin was both shocked and anxious, wondering why Jeffrey was here. Was it a coincidence, or was he here intentionally? Before she could process it, Jeffrey patted her head gently, saying with a hint of amusement, "You've certainly gotten yourself into quite a mess." Havenik, enraged at the interruption, insisted he was disciplining Aerin and questioned Jeffrey's interference. Jeffrey, calmly observing that no one appeared seriously injured, further incensed Havenik. He roared that Aerin, a mere girl, dared to strike legitimate members of the Braunos family, calling her actions appalling. Jeffrey retorted, questioning whether someone who pulled hair and hurled insults like freeloading parasite and orphan could truly be considered a brother. Havenik, flustered, tried to deny the accusations, but Jeffrey invited anyone present to confirm the truth, further enraging the Duke. Ignoring him, Jeffrey told Aerin they had no time to waste, and commanded her to leave with him, to which she quickly agreed. Later, Jeffrey tended to Aerin's wounds, instructing her to stay still and asking if she was in pain. A nervous Aerin assured him she was fine, while he cautioned her to be more careful. Inwardly, she worried she had ruined her chances of being adopted. She believed that while she might be useful as an assistant, they would never go so far as to adopt her. And of all people, Jeffrey had witnessed her pathetic display. Jeffrey consoled Aerin, saying that after that debacle, Avalon and Bimel wouldn't bother her again anytime soon. He jokingly referred to them as the pants-wetting brothers, causing Aerin to fluster. He then told her that since he had found her, he would let it slide this time. But if anything happened in the future, she should inform him. After all, she was his assistant, and he was responsible for her. Aerin nodded, promising not to mess up again. But Jeffrey firmly interrupted her, stating that she had done nothing wrong today and should never apologize when she hadn't made a mistake, handing her a book as he spoke. He explained that he had picked it up and dusted it off, but if she minded, he could buy her a new one. Aerin quickly refused, expressing her appreciation for the book as it was a sign of Jeffrey's trust in lending it to her. She recalled a past memory where he had told her he didn't lend his books to just anyone. Realizing the simple gesture held significant meaning for her, Jeffrey softly replied, "I understand." Nanny Mary, seeing Aerin's bruised face and torn clothes, immediately became worried and asked what had happened. Fearing the spread of rumors, Aerin lied and said she had simply fallen. Mary remained unconvinced, suspecting a fight, and even asked if Sir Jeffrey was involved. Aerin quickly denied it, flinching at the implication, and presented the medicine Jeffrey had given her as proof. Mary gently held Aerin's hand, advising her to always be honest so she could help her. Aerin still refused to divulge the truth, insisting she had merely tripped on the stairs. Mary sighed, noting that Aerin had changed a lot since recovering from her fever. Inwardly, Aerin acknowledged that Mary, being the closest to the original Aerin, was the most likely to notice the differences in her behavior. She pondered how to reassure her without raising suspicion. However, Mary made it clear that she liked this stronger Aerin, but asked her not to hide her pain. She patted her gently, making Aerin promise to be honest when she was hurt or upset. Aerin agreed. Aerin's gaze fell upon some research papers, surprised to find that Jeffrey was preparing to discard them. She realized these blueprints contained designs for magical tools that would become crucial in the future, though currently too advanced and lacking the necessary materials. Aerin knew their value would skyrocket within 10 years. She saw a huge opportunity. If she could commercialize and patent them now, she could make a fortune when demand rose. This would also serve as a backup plan if Jeffrey didn't adopt her. However, time was running out. Jeffrey had unexpectedly departed for the royal palace 3 days prior, much earlier than in her previous life. She suspected that becoming his assistant might have altered the timeline. She knew Jeffrey would be even busier upon his return. Aerin felt the immense pressure of producing and distributing the products before the deadline. But as a 7-year-old, she wondered how she could possibly gather the expensive materials, manufacture the tools, and handle distribution all by herself. She was startled when an elderly man arrived, realizing it was the Duke, Jeffrey's grandfather, and she tensed up. She quickly bowed, addressing him as grandfather, even though she had never spoken to him one-on-one before, except at his funeral in her past life. When the Duke inquired about Jeffrey, Aerin explained that he had gone to the royal palace a few days prior. The Duke became irate, frustrated that Jeffrey was still wasting his life in the laboratory. Aerin was puzzled by his reaction, wondering if he had some objection to Jeffrey visiting the royal palace. The Duke declared that if Jeffrey continued down this path, he would be kicked out of the estate and would have to learn his lesson. Aerin was shocked. She knew Jeffrey was dedicated to his research, but not as carelessly as the rumors suggested. If the Duke knew that Jeffrey was collaborating with Elfro on crucial research, he might have a different perspective. When the Duke threatened to take away Jeffrey's laboratory, Aerin panicked, realizing how disastrous the consequences would be. Despite her anxiety, she mustered her courage and firmly protested, insisting that it couldn't happen. Just then, the Duke's aide informed him that everything was ready. The Duke paused, asking Aerin what she meant by it couldn't happen. Aerin nervously insisted that Jeffrey could not be kicked out, arguing that his research was far from useless. She passionately explained that if his research succeeded, it would greatly benefit the entire empire. Deep down, she knew that the profits from Elfrose alone would be enough to support several generations without working. The Duke scoffed, but Aerin pressed on, claiming that Jeffrey would soon earn enough money to become independent and no longer rely on him. When the Duke asked if Jeffrey himself had said this, Aerin hesitated, then awkwardly affirmed. The Duke then cryptically commented about living in the past and driving Jeffrey mad, leaving Aerin confused. He warned her that if she tried to deceive him, she would be in trouble too. When he inquired about her role as Jeffrey's assistant, Aerin confidently stated that she identified and corrected calculation errors in the research logs. The Duke, intrigued, examined the research papers while Aerin eagerly added that Jeffrey called her a calculating genius. The Duke and his aide began to scrutinize Jeffrey's work, seemingly reassessing their opinions. Jeffrey's aide admitted he didn't fully understand the magical science equations, but he found it impressive that Aerin could read and even mentally calculate them. The Duke, surprised by the complexity of the equations, questioned Aerin about her abilities. She confirmed she solved them independently, although Jeffrey had been teaching her about magical science rituals. The Duke then asked what she intended to do with this knowledge. Aerin confidently declared that she wanted to create and sell the items on the blueprints, not just research them. This piqued the Duke's interest, and he asked her what she specifically meant. Aerin excitedly explained that while these inventions might seem unfamiliar now, in the future, people would want them one after another, even the Duke himself. The Duke was amused, chuckling as he asked if she truly believed these products would be that popular. Aerin, without hesitation, confidently affirmed that they would be a bestseller. The Duke told Aerin that if her claims were true, she should be able to manage on her own, even if the research funding was cut after the annual meeting. Aerin was stunned, realizing she might have inadvertently trapped herself with her own words. The Duke, seemingly satisfied, said that securing funds wouldn't be a problem, then dismissed Aerin, telling her she no longer needed to guard the empty laboratory. After he left, Aerin felt bewildered, unsure if talking about the blueprints was in vain or if the Duke had planned this conversation all along. One thing was clear from the start. She had just made a bad situation worse. As Duke Havenik and his aide left, the aide reminded him of his original plan to clear out the laboratory that day. However, the Duke decided to postpone it until after the annual gathering. When his aide asked if he was referring to Jeffrey, the Duke angrily denied it. The aide then commented on Aerin's intelligence and potential, to which the Duke agreed. He recalled Aerin's quiet demeanor when she first arrived at the estate, which reminded him of his own son, Aerin's father, who had once considered leaving the family but ultimately died, leaving Aerin behind. The Duke pondered how she had changed so much overnight, while his aide suggested that perhaps Jeffrey had recognized her talent and given her confidence. The Duke dismissed this notion, claiming Jeffrey couldn't even take care of himself. The Duke's aide pointed out that the Duke always reacted strongly whenever Jeffrey was mentioned. He suggested that Aerin's sudden transformation might simply be her true nature emerging, as children adapt quickly to new environments. He then proposed that Aerin should receive a formal education, like the young masters, emphasizing that the Brauno family was known for cultivating genius, and Aerin's abilities fit this principle. The Duke acknowledged her talent, but considered her too young to be tested. When his aide asked what test he was referring to, the Duke mentioned Aerin's claim about manufacturing and selling items to secure research funding. He dismissed the idea, believing it impossible for a child to accomplish such a feat. He admitted that he had only mentioned it hoping Jeffrey would hear and finally take things seriously. Inwardly, however, he noted that Raphael, his aide's speculations were completely off the mark. Aerin stood outside Raphael's office with her sketchbook, considering the timing of her visit. She figured his meeting with the advisors must be over by now. She noted that the Duke usually divided his time between the townhouse in the Imperial City and the castle. But this time he'd stayed at the castle longer, most likely due to preparations for the annual gathering. The gathering was a significant event where the Brauno family showcased their achievements and made important decisions. It was held for only 3 days each year and carried considerable weight. Any decisions made during this event were strictly binding, meaning any changes would have to wait until the following year. Due to its importance, members of the Brauno family never missed it. Aerin contemplated the upcoming annual gathering, anticipating the announcement of her adoption into the Havenik family. She recalled how hectic this period had been in the past, as she had been forced to work through the night preparing reports for Havenik. Havenik was only interested in immediate profits and disregarded future-oriented ventures. When his investments failed, he would splurge extravagantly to cover it up, leaving his subordinates to clean up the mess. Aerin had to write reports, spinning these failures into successes, a time she remembered as both exhausting and terrifying. Working with Jeffrey, by contrast, was a breeze. However, even the best workplace could become unbearable if it disappeared. Anxiety gnawed at her, the fear that alongside the announcement of her adoption, the family might announce the termination of Jeffrey's research. Although this hadn't happened in her previous life, things were slightly different now, and she couldn't stand idly by and do nothing. Aerin fought down her nerves, determined to present her proposal to Raphael. She told herself that as the head of the Brauno family, he would surely be interested in her ideas. With a newfound confidence, she knocked on the door. A man opened the door, surprised to see her. A maid noticed and commented on her elegant attire. As Aerin walked in, whispers rippled through the room, speculating that she might be the deceased colony's child, due to her strong resemblance to him. Aerin understood the importance of the household staff, recognizing that making a good impression on them was even more beneficial than impressing the Duke himself. She politely greeted each person, earning their admiration. They found her adorable and speculated whether she had brought drawings or a letter for her grandfather, the head of the family. Aerin was surprised to see Viscount Dish. He inquired about the nature of her visit. With confidence, she expressed her desire to see her grandfather, further piquing the curiosity and excitement of the staff. They commented on the thickness of her sketchbook and joked about how endearing granddaughters always were. Dish escorted Aerin to Raphael's office, announcing her arrival while her grandfather was still in a meeting. Aerin immediately became nervous, bowing in greeting, but struggling to lift her head due to anxiety. The staff whispered amongst themselves, chuckling softly at her nervousness. They noted that she must have meticulously timed her arrival for the meeting's conclusion. They also noticed the beads of sweat on her forehead, a testament to her effort. Her grandfather, Raphael, finally spoke, beckoning Aerin closer. However, Aerin grew even more anxious, bewildered by the fact that the others hadn't left the room, which only amplified her unease. Hesitantly, she presented her sketchbook to her grandfather, stating she had something to show him. Raphael, having just finished venting his frustration at Jeffrey, wondered if Aerin was afraid of him. A woman helped Aerin settle onto a sofa. Raphael asked if he needed to look at it immediately, but Aerin firmly pressed the sketchbook into his hands, urging him to examine it carefully. Their curiosity piqued. The staff crowded around, eager to see Aerin's drawings, prompting Raphael to question why they hadn't left yet. They awkwardly claimed they were merely curious about Aerin's artistic skills, speculating that she must have learned to write as well. Raphael irritably reminded them that they had plenty of work to do, ordering them to leave. He then turned to Viscount Dish, questioning his continued presence. Dish replied that he would stay a little longer, having just remembered an important matter to discuss. Raphael continued to peruse Aerin's sketchbook, thoughtfully clicking his tongue. Dish observed him carefully, noting that the Duke had never been so slow, even when reading top-secret documents. He briefly suspected the sketchbook might contain a threat, but quickly dismissed the notion. If that were the case, Raphael wouldn't have that expression. Suddenly, Raphael burst out laughing. Both Aerin and Dish were startled. Still chuckling, he commented on what Aerin had brought him. A curious Dish asked if he could see it too. Raphael allowed it. As Dish read Aerin's sketchbook, he discovered a plea written to her grandfather. "Grandfather, please turn these designs into products and sell them. In exchange, please preserve Sir Geoffrey's laboratory and research funding, leaving them as they are. Don't kick him out." Realizing the weight of her words, Dish was stunned. This wasn't just a sweet letter from a granddaughter. It was essentially a business proposal to the Empire. For a business tycoon like Raphael to receive such a direct request from a child was truly astonishing. Dish continued reading, noticing another message from Aerin. If you agree, please turn the page. Otherwise, do not. The next page contains crucial information about the products. Dish now understood why Raphael had been so deliberate in turning the pages. He was considering whether to proceed. Despite his curiosity about the next page's contents, Dish also recognized their confidential nature, so he decided to inquire no further. He returned the sketchbook to Raphael, having seen enough. A deep admiration bloomed within Dish. A proposal written in colored pencil, not only presenting a business concept, but also cleverly controlling the negotiation process. Raphael admitted that Aerin's proposal was interesting, but questioned what would happen if this business investment resulted in a loss. Without hesitation, Aerin replied, "Grandfather, you would never make a losing deal anyway." Raphael, intrigued, asked why. Aerin, brimming with confidence, argued that even if the product didn't sell, the materials could be recycled, minimizing any potential losses. When her grandfather questioned the initial cost, she pointed out that it was negligible compared to the research funding. She emphasized that it was a drop in the bucket, and even with poor sales, the proposal would still help reduce research expenditures. Her grandfather, impressed, realized she wasn't just mimicking adults, but proposing a legitimate business deal. Aerin asserted it was a win-win situation for everyone. Her grandfather conceded that even in a worst-case scenario, they would break even. Curious, he inquired whether there were any magic stones remaining at Viscount Dish's residence. Dish confirmed they had enough magic stones to create approximately 50 magical tools. Raphael then surprised Aerin by offering her a chance to test her proposal. Using these materials, Aerin was thrilled, while Dish, hesitant, questioned his master's intentions. Raphael, however, cut him short, stating he hadn't finished speaking. Aerin's grandfather approved her proposal and instructed her to create a test product first, assigning personnel to assist her. He then tasked her with distributing the finished products, suggesting they be displayed in shops in the Imperial City, since there would only be about 50 of them. Dish hesitantly agreed, but pointed out he didn't even know what the product was. Raphael reassured him that while the item might seem insignificant now, it would become highly sought after in the future. He even suggested he might want one himself. Bolstered by his confidence, Aerin beamed with excitement and eagerly promised to do her best. Humming a cheerful tune, Aerin walked briskly towards the library, a mix of exhilaration and relief washing over her as she celebrated successfully securing a deal with her grandfather. Although she wouldn't personally profit from the sales, she was happy, knowing that if the magical tools sold well, she wouldn't be kicked out of the laboratory immediately. This gave her more time to conduct research and ensure Jeffrey's position remained secure. Determined to make the most of this opportunity, she planned to quickly peruse some journals before dedicating the rest of the week to product development. Despite this, her situation hadn't changed. Her adoption was still undecided, and Raphael was still keeping a close eye on her. She felt a sense of lightness, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. She wondered why she suddenly felt this way. Perhaps it was because she finally had a hand in her own destiny. Uncertainty still lingered, but for the first time, she felt she had accomplished something meaningful. While in the library, Aerin was greeted by a librarian named Alphonse. Although Aerin didn't recognize her, Alphonse explained that she had seen Aerin before but hadn't had the chance to introduce herself. She then informed Aerin that she was delivering a large stack of books, which Jeffrey had ordered. Astonished by the sheer volume, Aerin wondered what they were for. Alphonse also relayed a message from Jeffrey, saying that the books weren't borrowed this time, but a gift. He even said that if Aerin didn't want to read them, she could just toss them aside. Aerin found this odd. Why would he bother buying so many books only to tell her she could throw them away? Picking up one of the volumes, she wondered if Jeffrey was trying to encourage her to study harder, or if he felt guilty about her previous predicament with the borrowed books. Lost in thought, Aerin suddenly recalled the day Jeffrey had rescued her and comforted her, telling her she hadn't done anything wrong. The memory warmed her heart, making her realize that despite her confusion, she didn't resent his gesture. Jeffrey returned home late that night, drenched and soiled by the grimy rain. Dejected by another failed experiment, he grumbled about the so-called best research laboratory in the Empire, feeling that all their efforts had culminated in the discovery of a similar, yet useless, crystal. He sighed, recalling the conversation with his colleagues, who reminded him that determining the crystal's composition from its scorched remains was an impossible task. But Jeffrey refused to accept this. He believed that no matter the difficulty, they had to find a way. His thoughts then drifted to Aerin. Despite her young age, she could effortlessly pinpoint flaws in complex formulas, something even the chief researcher found challenging. Thanks to her, their stalled research had finally progressed, and she spoke of it as if it were nothing. Unlike others who grew discouraged, Aerin remained focused and enthusiastic in a laboratory. This led Jeffrey to consider formally mentoring her, perhaps even sending her to an academy or specialized institution for formal education. But realizing she might be too young, he pondered tutoring her himself until she was ready. As he contemplated this, he suddenly pictured Aerin calling him Papa with a bright, joyful smile. The image resembled a blissful family scene, a man with a wife and child. Yet, the vision only brought him sorrow, hinting at a painful past or a longing for something he knew he could never have. Aerin sat quietly in her room, reading, reflecting on how busy the 2 weeks since returning from Raphael's office had been. She had been completely engrossed in studying magical science, consulting on magical tool development, reviewing logs, and handling various tasks, almost as busy as she had been in her previous life. However, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had successfully completed all the logs Jeffrey had assigned her, leaving only the day's reading before he returned that evening. Her nanny, Marie, interrupted her, reminding her that today was meant to be a day of rest. Marie encouraged Aerin to play outside in the garden, saying that children needed fresh air and sunshine to thrive. Aerin initially showed no interest, arguing that she was about to start reading. Marie persisted, pointing out that she hadn't been outside for a while due to her recent fever. Although reluctant, Aerin decided to take a short walk. She reasoned that, being only 7 years old in this life, pushing herself too hard could lead to serious illness. This she wanted to avoid. Strolling through the garden, Aerin enjoyed the pleasant weather and the fragrance of blooming flowers. Grateful she had listened to Marie. As she passed a fountain, she overheard a conversation and recognized the voice. She noticed a noblewoman, Aerin Brauno, Havenik's wife, speaking with a man. Aerin expressed concern about failing to gain her father's favor this year. If she failed to secure admission this year, the man acknowledged her worries. Aerin watched as Aerin handed something to the man, which aroused Aerin's suspicion. Aerin instructed him to secure admission by any means necessary, promising to pay the remainder upon completion. Once the deed was done, the man assured her that the bribe should be enough to guarantee success. Before they could discuss further, Aerin sent someone nearby and glanced in Aerin's direction. However, Aerin carefully slipped away, avoiding detection. Aerin then changed the subject, praising the man for his dedication to educating children. The man humbly denied the praise, but Aerin insisted and bid him farewell. After he left, Aerin approached Aerin, scolding her for not properly greeting an adult. Aerin quickly greeted her and pretended to have been chasing a butterfly. Seemingly unconcerned, Aerin let Aerin go and walked away herself, avoiding further suspicion. Aerin was shocked by what she had witnessed. The Havenik siblings had bribed their way into the Royal Academy. She realized the man with Aerin must have been Hilberg, the Brauno family tutor, who had helped Avalon and Vimmel cheat their way in. This explained why the untalented Avalon struggled academically, constantly repeating grades and barely managed to graduate. Aerin was frustrated by her inability to record this evidence, wishing she had a magical recording device. But she decided to file the information away for future use. Just then, a steward approached Aerin, addressing her respectfully and informing her that the Duke requested her presence in his office. Aerin, a thrill coursing through her, hurried to the Duke's office, greeting him with an enthusiastic hello. The Duke explained that he had summoned her for a midterm review. Aerin noticed a product on the desk and was astonished by its quality. It looked even better than she had anticipated. He asked her to demonstrate the portable hairdryer she had developed. Aerin explained that while hairdrying tools already existed on the market, the true value of her product lay in its long-term usability. She tested it, showcasing its functionality. The Duke acknowledged the high demand, revealing that the initial batch of 50 units had sold out immediately in the Imperial City. Aerin was taken aback by the swift success. He further elaborated that noble women, upon learning that it maintained a stable temperature without overheating, had eagerly lined up to place their orders. The Duke also mentioned that he hadn't seen Dish, presumably a business partner, so excited about something in a long time. Aerin beamed at the news. This success aligned perfectly with her strategy. She had wanted to launch this product first because traditional hot air machines were bulky, difficult to use, and could scorch hair if handled improperly. Her new hairdryer, however, was lightweight, allowed users to set the desired temperature, and was much easier to operate. She remembered it being one of the first popular products when magical tools became widespread. While the current price point might be too high for commoners, wealthy noblewomen would certainly find it worth the cost. Impressed by Aerin's business acumen, the Duke informed her that since the first batch had sold out, he considered this a final review rather than a midterm one. He proposed producing more, and Aerin excitedly agreed. Just then, Hilberg, the tutor Aerin had witnessed accepting a bribe earlier, entered the office. Aerin was startled, realizing Hilberg must be worried. She might report him, though unfortunately, she had no proof. The Duke then introduced Aerin to Hilberg, saying she was the bright child he had mentioned earlier. He entrusted Hilberg with the task of mentoring Aerin, confident that despite her young age, she would learn quickly. The Duke introduced Hilberg as Aerin's tutor, instructing her to offer him a curtsy. Though inwardly wary of Hilberg due to his involvement in the bribery incident, Aerin managed a small smile as she curtsied, introducing herself as Aerin Brauno. Hilberg responded lightly, saying there was no need for such formalities as a steward brought in tea. He remarked that Aerin would likely excel at the academy, perhaps even entering the Imperial Academy at the top of her class. The Duke concurred, acknowledging her intelligence and potential. Hilberg encouraged the idea, mentioning Parents' Observation Day as a significant event to look forward to. However, the Duke's primary focus was the entrance ceremony first. Meanwhile, Aerin was utterly dumbfounded by the conversation. She realized that if her adoption plans didn't go smoothly, her future at the academy would be uncertain. Worse, she might not even live to see that day. In the laboratory, Jeffrey, impressed with Aerin's work, was surprised she had managed to organize the logs in his absence. Aerin happily explained that she found it interesting and had also finished the book he lent her. She promised to diligently study the new one as well, to which Jeffrey offered words of encouragement. However, Aerin knew her training regimen would prevent her from coming to the lab every day, especially on days she had classes at the academy. She decided to inform Jeffrey of this change. The scene shifted to the Duke's office, where a furious Jeffrey burst through the door, demanding to know who dared take his assistant away for training. The Duke, incensed by Jeffrey's abrupt behavior, roared back, calling him an insolent fool. Aerin, who had followed Jeffrey in, witnessed the tense confrontation. When the Duke noticed Aerin's presence, he composed himself, but sharply rebuked Jeffrey, stating that he was the one who needed to relearn etiquette. Jeffrey argued back, claiming it was the Duke who had disregarded decorum first, and demanded to know why decisions were being made about his assistant without his consultation. The Duke firmly replied that what the child needed was an education, not work. Jeffrey retorted sarcastically that it hardly looked like Aerin was being locked up and forced to work, but the Duke scoffed at this and berated him. He reminded Jeffrey that even if one were to freely explore the world, it was never enough, and chastised him for leaving a 7-year-old child alone in a laboratory to work. Exasperated, the Duke declared he was tired of harboring a good-for-nothing like Jeffrey in his house and ordered him to leave. Jeffrey was left speechless, while Aerin, watching the confrontation, was unsure how to react. She realized Duke Raphael seemed to harbor a deep resentment towards Jeffrey. Jeffrey, still defiant, insisted that he would personally oversee Aerin's education and career, just as he would his own. However, the Duke cut him off, refusing to entertain his stubbornness. Frustrated, Jeffrey angrily shot back, refusing to let the Duke control everything as he pleased. As the argument between Jeffrey and the Duke escalated, Aerin grew increasingly anxious, worried that despite Jeffrey's efforts, he might be driven away without any resolution. Unable to remain silent, she mustered the courage to interrupt them, suggesting that she could do both, study and assist Jeffrey. Internally, Aerin wrestled with her decision. Although her role as an assistant was a business arrangement, it allowed her to see Jeffrey consistently, something she didn't want to lose. At the same time, she saw an opportunity for recognition from the Duke and didn't want to miss out on that either. Most of all, she feared that if she gave something up now, she might lose an important connection forever. Jeffrey insisted that whether it was at the academy or a scholarly institution, he would ensure Aerin receive an education. However, the Duke argued that Aerin was still a child and should be educated within the family for the time being. The tension thickened as Jeffrey passionately defended Aerin's capabilities, exclaiming that he knew what Aerin was capable of, to which the Duke angrily retorted that he knew as well. As the heated argument between Jeffrey and the Duke continued, Aerin desperately tried to interject again. However, both men, consumed by their anger, mistakenly yelled at her to be quiet. This left Aerin bewildered and further fueled her fear. The butler, noticing her distress, called out to her softly, but Aerin was too frightened to respond. Meanwhile, Jeffrey and the Duke continued their quarrel. Jeffrey insisted he was responsible for Aerin, while the Duke scoffed at the notion, telling him to take responsibility for himself first. Seeing Aerin's worsening state, the butler grew increasingly concerned. Unable to contain her emotions any longer, Aerin burst into tears. Her loud sobs abruptly halted the argument between Jeffrey and the Duke. The Duke, remorseful over the situation, realized his mistake and apologized. Jeffrey, without a word, picked Aerin up and carried her away to comfort her. Back in the laboratory, Jeffrey tried to turn the situation around, offering her a drink to help her calm down. Aerin felt embarrassed, reflecting on how being a child now made her emotions harder to control. She never thought she would cry simply from witnessing adults argue. Jeffrey apologized for frightening her, assuring her his anger wasn't directed at her, and asked how he had met her grandfather. Brushing the question aside, Jeffrey instead asked if Havenik had visited the lab while he was gone. Aerin, puzzled by the sudden mention of Havenik, denied it and asked why he brought it up. Jeffrey explained that he'd heard they were producing something based on the blueprints Aerin had taken. He was simply curious about it. Aerin recalled Jeffrey telling her previously that he didn't care what she did with the blueprints, but now she wondered if he disliked its commercialization. She explained that she had seen the blueprints, curious about how it worked, and mentioned it to her grandfather, who readily offered to help. He, however, questioned whether anyone had influenced her choice. Aerin firmly stated that no one had. Inwardly, she breathed a sigh of relief, for thanks to this, she could save the laboratory and earn money, though she kept that part secret. To ease Jeffrey's worries, she assured him that she had registered all patent rights under his name. Jeffrey, surprised to hear about the patent, questioned Aerin further. Aerin excitedly explained that since he had designed the magical tool, securing the patent ensured he would receive royalties in the future, even if they didn't see immediate profit. She mentioned that her grandfather had advised her on this. Jeffrey asked who had put her up to all this, and Aerin insisted it was her own decision. She explained that the patent application clearly listed Jeffrey as the creator. Inwardly, however, she admitted she did it for Survival Lab. If Survival Lab closed, she would be penniless. She also avoided telling Jeffrey the whole truth, fearing her grandfather might argue with the Duke if he knew. To keep things simple, Aerin soothed Jeffrey, saying he only needed to make casual conversation and focus on his research. Jeffrey, still bewildered by her actions, commented that she was truly difficult to understand. Thanks to Jeffrey resolving the issue with the Duke, Aerin's wish was granted. She could continue her studies at the family estate while assisting Jeffrey. The butler had acted as a mediator in the matter. Jeffrey advised Aerin to take her time with future planning, saying it was too early to decide whether to go to an academic institution or an academy. Although he seemed displeased, he dropped the subject after seeing how happy Aerin was on the day she started classes at the academy. Aerin was brimming with excitement. Her nanny, Mary, helped her get ready, reminding her to be careful and tell the teacher she fell. Aerin agreed cheerfully. She began attending the academy, studying under the tutelage of the Brauno family's tutor. The academy primarily educated direct descendants of the Brauno family. However, exceptionally gifted children from the collateral branches could also join after passing the screening process. Since they all belonged to the same family, Aerin hoped to get along with them. At the academy, a boy approached Aerin and greeted her, asking if she was the direct descendant everyone had been talking about. Aerin, squinting against the bright light, returned the greeting. The boy introduced himself as F. Terman, 10 years old, and having arrived at the castle a month prior. Aerin immediately recognized him. F. Turman was the future elite knight who would join the Imperial Knights and was renowned for his exceptional looks, immensely popular among noble girls and high society. Not knowing Turman was practically like not being a citizen of the Empire. She shook his hand and introduced herself. Suddenly, a commotion drew their attention. Turman frowned, recognizing the source of the disturbance. The brothers Abel Vaughn and Bimmel were bullying a boy wearing glasses. Aerin instantly recognized the boy, Nux Brauno. Unlike Turman, Nux was famous for a different reason. He would later become the court mage of the Edina Imperial Palace. Mages born with magical powers were considered extremely rare and precious, making them distinct from magic scientists like Jeffrey, who relied on magic stones. The Empire hadn't seen such a powerful mage in centuries, and Nux, upon awakening his abilities, would become the greatest among them. Seeing him bullied like this shocked Aerin. She thought of how furious his father, Madali Brauno, would be if he knew. She wondered why Nux didn't tell his parents about the bullying. At this rate, he might never reach his full potential as a court mage. Turman stepped forward to stop the bullying, telling Abel Vaughn and Bimmel to stop, as Nux was clearly distressed. Abel Vaughn snapped back, telling Turman to mind his own business. Bimmel sneered, calling Turman a scumbag, and in his irritation, added an insult about Turman's low rank. Aerin found their argument about social standing ridiculous. Before she could react, Abel Vaughn noticed her and, in a fit of pique, shoved her hard, sending her tumbling to the ground. Just then, Alphonse entered the classroom, politely greeting everyone. Abel Vaughn, still fuming, demanded to know why Alphonse was there and if their teacher was late again. Alphonse informed them that Lord Hilberg had encountered some issues, and today's lesson was postponed. They were assigned to read a book by the following day. Abel Vaughn grumbled about having to read yet another tedious volume. Alphonse simply acknowledged the complaint and left. Watching this, Aerin realized that as a powerless servant, Alphonse had no authority to interfere in the affairs of the noble children. Ultimately, only an adult with power or someone from the Brauno family could put a stop to this kind of behavior. Bimmel excitedly suggested to Abel Vaughn that they go horseback riding. Suddenly, Aerin stood on a chair and loudly announced that she was distributing the books, asking who wanted one. The other students swarmed around her, eager to get their hands on a copy. However, Abel Vaughn, irritated by the interruption, snapped at her, calling her an intruder and telling her to leave since there was no class. Aerin confidently declared her intention to read every single book in the place. Infuriated by her defiance, Abel Vaughn strode towards her, demanding to know if she thought this was her home. Aerin calmly reminded him that the place was open to the children of all the families. Abel Vaughn, enraged, raised his fist as if to strike her, but hesitated mid-swing, his expression flickering with uncertainty, before retreating with a frustrated TSK. Aerin inwardly smirked, knowing that if he had any sense, he wouldn't push the matter further. Meanwhile, Turman and Nux noticed that the book Alphonse had brought was the same one they had read last time, which was unusual, as Alphonse had never made such a mistake before. Alphonse entered Harvick's office, where Harvick questioned him about his tardiness. Alphonse explained that he had delivered a book to the academy as instructed by Mr. Hilberg. Harvick then inquired about Jeffrey's logs, but Alphonse revealed that Jeffrey had moved all his research materials to his study ever since he made young Miss Aerin his assistant. Harvick was skeptical, questioning what contribution Aerin could possibly make. Alphonse hesitated, but under Harvick's impatient prodding to tell the truth, nervously revealed that Aerin was responsible for finding errors in Jeffrey's logs. Harvick was stunned. How could a child possibly manage that? The formulas in Jeffrey's research were incredibly complex, challenging even for scholars, yet Aerin was apparently calculating them mentally. Harvick scoffed, finding it hard to believe. He then recalled a conversation with Celia, who had questioned the wisdom of sending Aerin to the academy. She was still furious about an incident involving Abel Vaughn, and worried about Aerin's presence there. Back in the present, Harvick's annoyance intensified when he learned that one of Jeffrey's recent inventions, which had unexpectedly generated a substantial profit, was actually Aerin's idea. He demanded to know if this was true, his frustration with Aerin and the entire situation growing. Daria questioned Harvick about how the young master's product design, which he had initially claimed as his own, had ended up being taken from him. Havenik admitted that his claim had been merely verbal. He had hoped to steal the design and take the credit, never anticipating that the invention would actually be used. He regretted his miscalculation, lamenting the lack of a formal contract. Celia speculated on why the young master would willingly hand over his design, essentially forfeiting his inheritance. Havenik dismissed the idea, pointing out that Aerin wasn't even his child. However, Celia found the situation suspicious. But hinting at a larger conspiracy they were unaware of, perhaps a secret deal between the young master and their father, with Aerin merely being a pretext. Overwhelmed and distraught by Celia's theory, Havenik snapped, yelling at her to stop, claiming her words were driving him mad. Celia, equally frustrated, retorted, lambasting Havenik for his aimless inaction. When Havenik reacted to being called a fool, she quickly clarified she hadn't meant it literally. Composing herself, Celia urged him to rationally assess the situation. She acknowledged the immense pressure they were both under, but stressed the need to act swiftly and strategically. She warned Havenik that while their father and the young master, Jeffrey, currently seemed at odds, there was no telling when they might reconcile. Before that happened, they needed to ascertain what the two were plotting. Havenik inwardly realized that Aerin wasn't just a burden, but a valuable asset, since both his father and Jeffrey were vying for her. A smug grin spread across his face as he acknowledged her usefulness, then dismissed Alphonse, instructing him to bring a transcribed copy of the log later and warning him to be prepared if he failed again. Alphonse departed, feeling drained, realizing he'd stumbled into something far more troublesome than anticipated. Opening the door, he was surprised to find Aerin and the other children waiting for him. Aerin hesitated before answering his question about needing the books. Just then, Jeffrey arrived, questioning Alphonse's absence from his post during working hours. Alphonse was startled, not expecting Jeffrey to be there. Aerin explained that since Alphonse had brought the wrong books, they had asked Jeffrey for them. Nux clarified that they had already read Imperial History 1 and wanted Imperial History 2. Alphonse then suggested that Mr. Hilbert probably wanted them to review the first volume again, not just for Aerin, but for all of them. Nux accepted the explanation, while Aerin confidently declared she had already read all the books. Nux was astonished that Aerin had read such complex material, finding it difficult to comprehend himself. Terman admitted it had taken him a long time to finish, as he kept falling asleep while reading. Aerin, however, nonchalantly stated that she simply found it interesting. Jeffrey then told Aerin that he had taken care of the matter, and she could go play with her friends. Aerin was momentarily confused, but after being prompted to retrieve the books for the others, she readily agreed and scampered off excitedly. Observing Aerin's enthusiasm, Jeffrey inquired if she was settling in well at the academy. Alphonse replied that she seemed to be getting along with several of the young dukes, but not with Abel Vaughn. Jeffrey surmised that Abel Vaughn was bothering her again and instructed Alphonse to keep a close watch on him, reporting any further harassment immediately. Alphonse agreed with a strained smile, his inner turmoil churning. He realized both Jeffrey and his master were forcing him to play double agent, and he was unsure how to navigate the increasingly complex situation. At the academy, Aerin prepared to leave, ensuring she had gathered all her belongings. Noticing Nux trying to hide, she reassured him that Abel Vaughn wasn't in the classroom. Nux cowered slightly but thanked her. Terman then asked Aerin if she was afraid of Abel Vaughn. Considering his previous threats, Aerin dismissed it as nothing serious, much to Terman's surprise. Nux, admiring Aerin's bravery, commented that despite being younger than him, she never backed down from Abel Vaughn, even when he threatened to hit her. He confessed he couldn't even bring himself to speak up. Aerin suggested he tell his parents about the bullying, but Nux refused, fearing they would be ashamed of him. He explained that his father, Maud Ali, worked on a large ship, often dealing with dangerous individuals, and was always courageous, decisive, and outspoken. Aerin inwardly acknowledged this, noting that Modron was indeed known for his competence within the guild. Nux, dejected and feeling helpless against Abel Vaughn's bullying, worried that his father would consider him a disgrace if he found out. Aerin, understanding his feelings, decided to help him in her own way. She whispered to Nux and Terman that Abel Vaughn and Bimmel still wet their beds, claiming she'd overheard Lady Celia discussing it. Terman giggled in surprise. Boldly weaving a blend of truth and fabrication, Aerin painted a picture designed to diminish Nux's fear of Abel Vaughn. She assured Nux that if he couldn't stand up to them, she would, as many times as it took. She'd even hit them if they bullied him again. She declared confidently that she wasn't afraid of Abel Vaughn in the slightest and encouraged Nux to stand with her. Emboldened by her words, Nux agreed, shaking her hand and asking for her continued support. Humming a cheerful tune, Aerin walked briskly down the hallway, reflecting on her productive day and planning to spend more time with the children tomorrow. However, as she glanced out the window, she froze, a jolt of shock coursing through her. She noticed someone heading towards her grandfather's office. Anxiety gripped her as she realized she wasn't prepared. Panic set in. She had to get to the Duke first to set things up. With a surge of determination, Aerin broke into a run. But in her haste, she collided with someone, tumbling to the ground and crying out for her grandfather. To her surprise, an elderly man extended a hand to help her up, asking if she was all right. Disappointment washed over Aerin. She was too late. As Aerin rushed towards her grandfather's office, she encountered the Duke, who inquired about her haste. Seeing Nux's father, Aerin Brauno, standing beside him, the Duke introduced Aerin, mentioning that she was around Nux's age. When the Duke instructed Aerin to wait outside, as he had a guest, she protested, expressing her desire to observe him at work. Putting on a charming, pleading expression, she promised to sit quietly. Viscount Dia supported her, suggesting it could be a valuable learning experience, and she might even contribute. A good idea. Aerin excitedly agreed. Seeing no harm, the Duke allowed her to stay. The guest, an elderly man, smiled warmly, stating he didn't mind, finding Aerin's affection for her grandfather heartwarming. Havenik, though his displeasure was evident, allowed Aerin to remain. Determined not to let his machinations succeed, Aerin recognized the man Havenik had brought with him, Truny. He was a con man who had previously swindled the Brauno family, causing significant financial losses. She knew if she didn't act, her family would once again become victims of a fraudulent deal. Resolving to stop it at all costs, she planned to derail the contract. The Duke then turned to Truny, inquiring about the nature of his proposed business. Truny formally introduced himself as the guild master of the Pelpark Guild, which specialized in intercontinental maritime trade, particularly in luxury goods. He explained that their primary offerings included fine art, bespoke leather goods, and rare tapestries, all highly sought after in international markets. The Duke acknowledged the guild's reputation, and Truny went on to discuss a collaboration between the Pelpark Guild and the Coke Guild. The Duke questioned Truny about his proposal, confirming that he intended to import luxury goods and distribute them within the empire. While Truny agreed, the Duke pointed out that his guild seemed capable of handling this independently and inquired what they expected from the empire. Truny conceded that, as the Perpak Guild primarily operated outside the empire, they lacked expertise in the domestic market. Madelon then clarified that they were, in fact, requesting the empire handle the distribution. Truny agreed, but also requested assistance with transportation. Logistics. This sparked concern, with Madelon questioning what precisely the Perpak Guild was contributing if the empire had to manage both distribution and transportation. Havenik, clearly frustrated, slammed his hand on the seat and shouted at Madeleine's blunt comment. However, Madelon calmly pointed out that the Perpak Guild didn't produce the goods themselves, and procurement was already handled by their own guild. He emphasized that, as these were luxury goods, their true value lay in branding, lest the tension escalate further. The Duke intervened, urging everyone to remain calm and continue the discussion without conflict. Madelon brought up the risks of handling luxury goods, emphasizing their susceptibility to counterfeiting and the difficulties of distribution. He warned that a small misstep could lead to significant losses. However, Havenik insisted that their guild needed to prioritize quality and accept some risk. The two exchanged tense glances. Truny attempted to reassure the Duke, arguing that no one would dare counterfeit goods distributed by the Coke Guild. Aerin silently noted Truny's smooth-talking tactics. The Duke, after considering the matter, stated that the guild would review the proposal and provide a response as soon as possible. Havenik was visibly taken aback, but reluctantly accepted his father's decision. Later, Havenik privately approached Truny, assuring him that he would personally explain the contract to the Duke again. However, Truny remained confident, believing the Duke wouldn't refuse a deal presented by his eldest son. He still expressed concern about potential delays due to the high value of the goods. He then suggested an upfront deposit to secure the agreement, implying it would ensure mutual trust. Truny requested a deposit of 10 million gold coins, which left Havenik stunned. Truny soothed him, emphasizing that with luxury goods, a large deposit was to be expected. He then subtly steered Havenik, telling him to take his time and not to worry, to make it seem like a reasonable request. Havenik's mind raced. He realized many of his past investments had failed, Jeffrey's designs had been taken, his mining investment hadn't yielded the expected returns, and his recent performance had been poor, with the annual meeting fast approaching. He feared his reputation would be utterly ruined if he backed out of this deal. Havenik reluctantly agreed to Truny's demand, promising to prepare the deposit as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Aerin, lost in thought while writing in her journal, worried that Truny would likely bring up the deposit. She knew that while a 15% deposit might be unavoidable, her priority was to stop the main contract to minimize the financial damage. Jeffrey, noticing her serious expression, asked what she was thinking about. Aerin vaguely replied that she was considering ideas for new products, though she wasn't sure if any would be good enough to drive Truny away. Jeffrey suggested that, in such cases, it was best to eliminate the most useless options first. Flipping through some designs, Aerin came across an unusual one and asked if it was a staff. Jeffrey explained it was actually a magical tool for determining the sex of animals. He had initially created it as a side project, but abandoned it, finding it impractical. Aerin noted the label on it read sex identifier. Aerin questioned whether the magical tool was truly useless, suggesting that if it could determine whether an egg would hatch a rooster or a hen, it might still have some value, even if limited. Jeffrey admitted he hadn't tested that, but he doubted it was possible. The tool was designed to differentiate between existing roosters and hens. In setting it to identify whether an egg will hatch a chick would be quite difficult, Jeffrey explained, hesitantly adding, but it might be able to differentiate between different eggs. At this, a spark of understanding ignited in Alan's eyes. Excitedly, he urged Jeffrey to elaborate on that particular point. Madeline, however, felt the deal was too risky, questioning the per-pack guild's true value if they brought nothing but smooth talk to the table. The Duke countered by citing the per-pack guild's successes in other countries. But Madeline pointed out that counterfeit luxury goods were rampant in those markets. He insisted that if the Coke Guild were to undertake this venture, they had to ensure the complete authenticity of their merchandise to maintain their reputation. Just then, Alan entered the Duke's office. The Duke greeted her warmly, mentioning that her academy lessons had finished for the day. Alan cheerfully greeted her grandfather, adding that she had come not only to see him, but also because she had a brilliant idea to share. Havenik, brimming with confidence, strode towards the Duke's office with Truny, certain that today would be the day their contract was finally finalized. However, his enthusiasm quickly waned when he saw Alan inside, wondering inwardly why she was there again. The Duke welcomed them both, saying he had been expecting them. He offered them seats and explained a reason for summoning them again. He wanted to reconsider the timeline of the deal rather than rushing into an agreement. He believed that a business transaction of this magnitude required mutual trust before proceeding. Truny, surprised, inquired how such trust could be established. In response, the Duke introduced Alan, stating that she would explain the plan. Alan politely greeted Truny, who recognized her as the young lady he had encountered the previous day. He curiously asked what idea she had to share this time. Alan inwardly chuckled, thinking Truny might not be so pleased once he heard her suggestion. She then asked him if he had brought any product samples. When Truny confirmed that he had, Alan requested he leave some behind, revealing their intention to develop a magical tool to verify the authenticity of his luxury goods. Truny was bewildered by Alan's statement, struggling to grasp her meaning. He asked if she was suggesting they create an authenticity checker for his merchandise. Alan confidently confirmed, explaining they already possessed a tool called a gender identifier and planned to modify its formula to develop a counterfeit detector. She added that Jeffrey himself would be in charge of the development. At the mention of Jeffrey's name, Truny immediately tensed, indicating his awareness of Jeffrey's reputation for creating reliable tools. Seeing his reaction, Alan smiled inwardly, realizing Truny understood the credibility of Jeffrey's work. Havenik, however, was annoyed, questioning why Jeffrey was suddenly involved, pointing out he had never shown interest in such business ventures before. The Duke intervened, explaining that Jeffrey had been working closely with Alan recently and found the concept intriguing enough to contribute his expertise. Havenik, though irritated, had little choice but to accept the explanation. The Duke then approached Alan affectionately, praising her sharp mind and ability to perfectly time her suggestions by merely listening to the adults' discussion. He even lifted her up in admiration. Truny, still uncertain, hesitantly asked if the tool was already completed. The Duke assured him that while the tool wasn't finished, the preliminary blueprints were ready and production would begin soon. He emphasized that with counterfeits so prevalent, this was merely a measure to ensure authenticity, implying Truny had no grounds for objection. Feeling cornered, Truny could only respond hesitantly. Forced into a reluctant agreement, a desperate Havenik confronted Truny, demanding an explanation for his unilateral actions without proper consultation. He pressed him further, questioning why Truny hadn't presented any of the samples he'd brought. Truny responded calmly, suggesting that if the Coke Guild was so meticulous, Havenik should have been better prepared. Havenik retorted that he'd seen an entire cartload of goods, insisting there must be at least one suitable item among them for presentation. Truny, however, remained dismissive, declaring the goods unworthy of being shown to the Coke Guild. Havenik was bewildered by Truny's sudden arrogance. His demeanor had completely shifted. Havenik began to suspect that if the deal here fell through, Truny might take his business elsewhere. He realized the Pelpar Guild likely had many potential partners. Interpreting Truny's posture as a take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum, Havenik, in a desperate attempt to regain control, hesitantly placated Truny, assuring him there was no need for discouragement. Truny, however, immediately steered the conversation towards the down payment, inquiring when Havenik could make it. Caught off guard, Havenik reminded Truny of his earlier assurance that there was no rush. But Truny suddenly pressed him, suggesting that even a partial payment, if not the full 10 million gold coins, would facilitate the preparation of better samples. Feeling cornered, Havenik quickly acquiesced, promising to get back to him as soon as possible. Later, a furious Celia stormed up to Havenik, venting her frustration and demanding to know where he expected to procure such a large sum of money on such short notice. She insisted the down payment was his father's responsibility. Desperate, Havenik tried to persuade Celia to contribute all of her savings, acknowledging the substantial amount. Celia angrily reminded him that they had already spent a fortune getting Avalon into the academy. Havenik then suggested Celia ask her father-in-law for the funds, a suggestion that enraged Celia. Slamming her hand on the table, she raged that expecting the illustrious Brauno family to beg for money from their in-laws was utterly ludicrous. Still clinging to a sliver of hope, Havenik tried to reassure her that everything would be fine once the deal went through. Celia, however, was unconvinced. She erupted, reminding him that he'd sung the same tune countless times, always claiming this time it'll work, yet nothing ever changed. She warned him that if he lost his father's favor, they would be left with nothing. A frustrated Havenik shot back, accusing his father of never supporting any of his endeavors, instead focusing all his attention on Alan. Celia, startled, asked if he meant Alan. Havenik angrily confirmed it, his fury stoked by the thought of Alan now working with Jeffrey on some counterfeit detector, and apparently enjoying it, which made Havenik's own struggles seem all the more pathetic. Celia grew suspicious, wondering if Jeffrey was truly involved in business again. She sensed something was amiss. She then told Havenik they couldn't ignore the situation. Havenik agreed, insisting they needed to teach Alan and Jeffrey a lesson. Celia, however, clarified that their goal was to separate Jeffrey from Alan. If Jeffrey continued to interfere, they would have to prepare for the worst. She suggested they take Alan away from Jeffrey. Meanwhile, Alan excitedly informed Jeffrey that her grandfather had agreed to the counterfeit detector proposal. Jeffrey, pleased with the news, patted her head, told her to sit down, and promised to fetch some snacks. Alan happily climbed onto a chair and asked him if he wasn't curious why she wanted to build the counterfeit detector. Jeffrey, in his usual calm manner, replied that he didn't mind, as long as it satisfied her curiosity. Alan hesitated, unsure if he truly trusted her or was simply indifferent. Jeffrey changed the subject, asking how her lessons were progressing. Ellen explained that her teacher was still busy, so she had been studying on her own. She was eager to know if Hilberg would eventually teach her, hoping the lessons would begin soon. Jeffrey reassured her that she didn't have much to learn and should consider this a time to relax. Ellen agreed, realizing that connecting with the other students was more important than the coursework itself. She considered that once Hilberg returned, the students who had been skipping class would also be back. She planned to decide who to talk to and keep an eye on Hilberg, watching for any inappropriate behavior. Furthermore, she reminded herself to track the profits from the extra magical tools. With all this in mind, she decided to finish her supply check for the day and return to her room. Feeling drowsy, Ellen dozed off, but quickly woke up, feeling slightly embarrassed. Jeffrey reassured her that it was normal at her age and suggested she go upstairs for a nap. As she lay in bed, she felt like she was wasting time as there was so much work to be done, but she soon fell asleep. A while later, she awoke to the sound of the Duke arriving to see Jeffrey. Recognizing her grandfather Raphael's voice, Ellen listened quietly to their conversation. The Duke asked for Ellen, but Jeffrey told him she was asleep and to come back later. However, the Duke insisted the matter was with Jeffrey, not Ellen. Hearing the tension in their conversation, Ellen worried they might argue and considered going downstairs. But then Jeffrey's words shocked her. He said he was planning to arrange for Ellen to be adopted. The Duke had come to visit Jeffrey to discuss Ellen's future, announcing his plan to formally adopt her at the upcoming annual meeting. Ellen, eavesdropping from upstairs, was stunned, initially assuming Jeffrey was going to adopt her. However, as the conversation continued, she realized this wasn't the case, leaving her bewildered. The Duke reassured Jeffrey that Ellen's role as his assistant wouldn't be affected, implying she could continue working with him even after the adoption. Jeffrey remained indifferent, asking if that was all, but the Duke insisted that Ellen needed parental care and couldn't continue living as she was. He urged Jeffrey to consider what was best for her, emphasizing that she deserved a proper home. When Jeffrey questioned who would adopt Ellen, the Duke revealed he had already made arrangements, and the most suitable candidate would be Jeffrey's own brother, a direct relative. Ellen was horrified when she heard that Havenik, Jeffrey's brother, would be adopting her. Jeffrey scoffed at the idea, questioning how the Duke could claim to care for Ellen while suggesting Havenik as her guardian. The Duke defended his decision, arguing that Havenik was at least trying to manage the family affairs. Unlike Jeffrey, who had wasted 2 years shutting himself away. He asked Jeffrey if he would rather maintain the status quo than have Havenik adopt her, implying this might be the best option for Ellen. The Duke then made a star comparison, asking if Jeffrey would say the same if Ellen were Viola, Jeffrey's deceased daughter, who had perished alongside his wife in the explosion. Ellen was shocked to hear Viola's name, as she only knew of the tragedy, not the depth of its impact on Jeffrey. The Duke accused Jeffrey of treating Ellen as a replacement for Viola, claiming that if he truly cared, he wouldn't just promise to take responsibility, but would take action. He then cruelly exposed Jeffrey's past, saying everyone knew he was drowning in grief, clinging to the memory of his wife and daughter. He criticized Jeffrey's obsession with finding someone to blame for an accident that happened years ago and using Ellen to fill the void left by Viola. Finally, the Duke demanded that Jeffrey stop pretending and let Ellen go rather than using her for his own sake. Jeffrey remained silent, unable to respond to the Duke's harsh words. Meanwhile, Ellen, who had been eavesdropping, grew anxious, realizing that if this conversation continued, all her efforts would be in vain. To interrupt them, she feigned waking up, making a noise, and pretending to be surprised to see her grandfather. The Duke, a flicker of remorse in his eyes, assumed their conversation had woken her. To cover the true reason for his visit, he lied, claiming he was merely curious about the progress of the fake detection device. He then urged Ellen to greet her grandfather properly, which she reluctantly did. Ellen noticed the sadness etched on Jeffrey's face, while the Duke sighed heavily. Curious, Ellen asked him why he sighed, wondering if he was tired. The Duke reassured her, saying only she would worry about him, and thanked her for her concern. Touched by his kindness, Ellen thought about what a good grandfather he was to her. Then, hesitantly, she asked if she should leave the laboratory now. The Duke patted her head, assuring her that he wouldn't send her away for adoption, but would keep her by his side a little longer. He explained that no matter where she was adopted, she could always use the laboratory. However, a wave of panic washed over Ellen. She knew that if she were adopted by Havenik, things would be disastrous. She hesitated, unsure whether to reveal the bullying she had endured at the hands of Havik's family, fearing the potential danger of confronting them. Noticing her hesitation, the Duke asked her directly if she disliked Havik. Ellen quickly denied it, but mentioned that Avalon and Vimmel didn't like her. The Duke understood immediately. Then how about staying with Jeffrey? He suggested. Ellen enthusiastically agreed, declaring her fondness for Sir Geoffrey. She fondly recalled how he gave her snacks, gifted her books, and even stood up for her when she was treated unfairly. Working and researching with Geoffrey felt as warm as sunshine, bringing her genuine happiness. Reassured by Ellen's words, the Duke promised to find her comfortable accommodations. Ellen happily agreed. Later, lying in the shade of a tree in the garden, she reflected on the recent calm. The Duke hadn't mentioned anything further about adoption, and Master Hilberg hadn't returned. This tranquility made her uneasy. Suddenly, Feldman and Nux came running towards her. Feldman asked what she was doing. Ellen replied that she was reading a book titled Principles of Management. Feldman found the title daunting, but Nux seemed intrigued. When asked about the book, Ellen explained that it taught business practices which further dampened Feldman's interest. Nux, however, defended the book, mentioning that his father had read it several times, implying it must be good. Nux excitedly told Ellen that she would get along well with his sister, Maudali. Ellen recalled having limited interaction with Maudali in her past life, but felt confident they could communicate well. She realized that befriending Maudali would also bring her closer to Nux, a win-win situation in her mind. Hearing this, Nux agreed happily. Feldman, feeling left out, considered reading the book as well. However, Nux dissuaded him, saying he didn't have to force himself. Feldman remained uncertain, complaining that he felt like the only one who didn't understand anything. Just then, a butler arrived, looking for Ellen. She excitedly ran off to meet the Duke. Upon seeing her, the Duke welcomed Ellen back, assuming she must be tired from assisting Geoffrey. Ellen cheerfully replied that she had been to the academy and the laboratory, adding slyly that helping Geoffrey wasn't tiring at all, as she had learned so much. The Duke, pleased with her enthusiasm, patted her head affectionately, and Ellen giggled sweetly. Ellen nervously glanced around, wondering if the Duke might bring up the topic of adoption, especially with the annual gathering fast approaching. However, the Duke surprised her by saying he wanted to give her a small gift as thanks for her assistance. Ellen breathed a sigh of relief. The conversation wasn't about the adoption after all. She pondered what to ask for. The thought of requesting Geoffrey adopt her crossed her mind, but she worried it would appear too presumptuous. Jewelry, something that might be useful in the future, was another consideration, but she realized it wouldn't necessarily win the Duke's favor. After careful thought, she naively requested a wish coupon, a voucher that would grant her one request at any time she desired. The Duke was initially taken aback, but then chuckled, understanding that she might not have anything specific in mind at the moment. He agreed, stating that as long as it wasn't anything dangerous, he would fulfill her wish. Ellen, feeling happy and excited, praised her grandfather, declaring him the best. Just then, the butler entered. He informed the Duke that the preparations he had requested were complete and inquired if he needed to wait. The Duke dismissed him, asking Ellen to remain seated for a moment. While waiting, Ellen noticed a ledger and gasped upon seeing its title, Chadwick Diamond Mine Profitability Report. She quickly realized it was the account book for the failing mine Havik was responsible for. Recalling her past life, she remembered the numbers being crudely altered to make the mine's profits appear better than they actually were. While they couldn't do anything about the down payment Trinith had already taken, she realized this was something they could still prevent. Initially, Ellen wanted to immediately inform the Duke of the discrepancies in the ledger, but she hesitated. A new idea sparked in her mind. If she used this information strategically, she might be able to create a reason to avoid being adopted by Havik. Ellen recalled the Chadwick mine, a hasty purchase by Havik to recoup his business losses, which had become one of his biggest financial failures. The mine yielded neither diamonds nor even coal, resulting in a year of continuous losses. To conceal this failure from Raphael, Havik had falsified the accounts and Ellen had been tasked with cleaning up the sloppy record-keeping. At the time, Havenik had ordered her to embellish the figures, and fearing dismissal, she had altered the records. Now, Ellen realized Havenik was likely planning to gloss over the matter at the annual gathering, deceiving Raphael, knowing he would be too busy to investigate until after the gathering concluded. However, by then, it would be too late to administer proper punishment. Determined to prove Havenik unsuitable as her adoptive father, Ellen decided she had to find concrete evidence before the annual gathering. She remembered Havenik kept a private ledger, a record of his own dealings. If she could obtain and expose this ledger, especially at the gathering, she could reveal the truth to the Duke and everyone present. The Duke invited Ellen to dine with him, offering her a rare opportunity to share a meal with Raphael. Ellen readily accepted, but upon arriving, she found Havenik and his wife, Salia, already present, causing her nerves to tighten. Salia greeted the Duke with a false smile and noted Ellen's presence with barely concealed displeasure, causing Ellen to shrink back slightly, seeking refuge behind the Duke. The Duke explained that since they were together at the time, he had brought Ellen along, but Salia suggested calling for their sons, Abalon and Vermeer, as well. The Duke, however, dismissed the idea, stating he had pressing matters to discuss and could invite the children another day. Ellen's anxiety grew. She realized the Duke was still considering Havenik as her adoptive father. He wouldn't have invited them to dinner otherwise. This worried her, as she wasn't fully prepared to expose Havenik's scheme. As they gathered for dinner, Jeffrey arrived late, drawing a displeased reaction from Havenik. Havenik scolded him, saying he'd been called ages ago and yet was the last to arrive. Jeffrey, however, seemed unconcerned, nonchalantly replying that he wouldn't have come at all if not for his assistant's insistence. His indifferent attitude infuriated Havenik, but before their argument could escalate, the Duke intervened, reprimanding them for their constant bickering. Meanwhile, Ellen realized with a jolt that Jeffrey might have come because of her. Once everyone was seated at the dining table, the Duke urged them to begin before the food got cold. Ellen, however, found herself too anxious to eat, her nervousness making her pale. She worried that the Duke might be displeased if she only picked at her food. Noticing her unease, Jeffrey quietly placed a dish before her, offering her something that might be easier to swallow. Surprised by his gesture, Ellen thanked him and took a bite. To her relief, the food was delicious, and she began to feel slightly more at ease, gradually starting to eat. During dinner, the Duke inquired about the progress with the Fair Park Guild. Havenik confidently replied that the guild was preparing top-quality samples and that they had paid less upfront than requested. The Duke asked, surprised, why they had paid anything upfront at all. Havenik argued that there were many guilds competing for the business. Though the Duke seemed skeptical, he acknowledged the situation. Just then, Salia nudged Havenik, reminding him of something. Realizing, Havenik cleared his throat and addressed the Duke, saying he wanted to move forward with the previously proposed Research Institute project. He explained that the personnel had been finalized and the land had been secured, so now was the perfect time to proceed with the project. The Duke, however, remained unconvinced, pointing out that they had previously agreed that establishing a research institute was premature. But Havenik insisted that now was the ideal time, even suggesting that Ellen join the institute as an apprentice. During dinner, Havenik proposed that Ellen join his planned research institute, claiming it would allow her to study economics and management while also more effectively translating Jeffrey's designs into products. Ellen, however, immediately recognized his true intentions. He wanted to exploit Jeffrey's designs for his own profit and, incidentally, get his hands on her as well. Before Havenik could continue, the Duke interrupted him, stating that before discussing the Research Institute, they must first decide on Ellen's living arrangements. Havenik hesitated, realizing the Duke was referring to her adoption. At this point, Sally interjected, revealing her plans to find adoptive parents for Ellen at this year's annual meeting. However, the Duke unexpectedly turned to Havenik, expressing his hope that he would become a candidate for Ellen's adoption. Hearing this, Ellen paled, realizing that Havenik might actually become her adoptive father, something she desperately wanted to avoid.